All right. Everybody, welcome today to Making the Familiar Strange here at Tri-Faith. This is our opportunity to share new perspectives, learn new things. Today's speaker is Safiyyah El-Amin. She's going to be presenting on women, wives, and warriors, the role of women in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The goals of our program is interfaith dialogue. It's an opportunity for people of different religious and non-religious backgrounds to share meaningful conversations from their traditions and to encourage perspective taking by looking at familiar things from new points of view. As always, our ground rules are to be as respectful as possible, to challenge your own assumptions, to speak from your own point of view, and to be open to new perspectives. Sometimes the things we learn can be challenging and we might have an initial reaction, but always just be open, be kind, and things should go smoothly. Just some upcoming events here at Tri-Faith. This Thursday from 11:30 to 12:30, we will be having our Coffee on the Commons. Because it is Ramadan, we will not be having any snacks. We'll just have beverages for those who are not fasting. But we encourage everybody to come and just join in a time of fellowship. Monday, April 8th, will be our next Women of Tri-Faith lunch, which is on Zoom. And the next Making the Familiar Strange, I will be hosting, talking about the bronze serpent that shows up in the Hebrew Bible. It's mentioned in the New Testament and also has traditions in Greek and Roman mythology, plus all of the medical associations with the bronze serpent. So that's just a curiosity that I decided to do a deep dive on. I'm always looking for speakers. So if you have any topic that you're just like, I wonder about that, I want to research that, and then talk about it in front of a bunch of strangers, you would be welcome to. Please send me your ideas. And with that, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over. Oops. Sorry, I can't. Turn it over to Dr. El-Amin.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And this is amazing. Thank you all for being here and this opportunity. I want to talk about women, wives, and warriors. And the entire title talks about confronting evil of socially sinful structures and religious rhetoric. So some structures that may appear evil and how we talk about them. Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all have suffered from the creation of religious rhetoric that advances the racialization of people and their religious beliefs and their culture. So what that means is there are these dehumanizing interpretive lenses, and they further expose the disdain for contrasexual, and I'm going to define that, characteristics and feminine behavior that defines gender expectations. And the result is the violence of evil against female personhood, voice, and authority in leadership. So I want to talk about this under the auspices of this notion of strange, making the strange familiar. Some women's roles and hegemonic devices in Torah and Shariah law contend that racialization of gender roles are akin to the oppression of African American women, or at least that's my assertion. And as African American women, subsequently all women. Or sexism that's been projected onto women and men, and other women by men, and other moods of hatred towards this notion of sexism. So when I talk about racialized sexism, this is kind of where I'm going. Sexism is racialized, a concept of society and the politics within the society. We are often identified with relationships, groups, or practices for which we did not self-define and affect gender roles. I'm going to discuss a few examples of that later. So subsequently, roles versus duty reveal a pastoral call from the ritualized mundane to religious necessity, denouncing sinful structures, revitalizing the community, promoting the flourishing in society. So when I talk about pastoral and ritualizing and religious, I'm using them as practical terms of empowerment. I'm not talking about the places to where we go and all of the rituals in which we participate. Although that I think is a part of it. It's not about a position that we hold. It's indicative of female empowerment in any role that we hold. And so it asserts that there's a time for the domestication of wives and mothers. I have no problem with those images, domestications of wives and mothers. But understand that the same women who are the wives and mothers are also the same women that are warriors. So I talked about these, the rhetoric and the belief systems that propagate these kind of systemized ways of thinking of God and God's people. We use that language all the time. God's people may suggest that there are some people who are not God's people, or God's chosen people may suggest that there are some people who are not God's chosen people. And so how do we talk about those things and what they mean? And as ambiguous as it can seem in one context, the language is the partial impetus for this persistent reiteration of women as evil. Another part is normative interpretations of sacred text that reinforce this phenomenon. For about the last 50 years, there have been womanist and feminist critics that have come in the way of female scholars. Researchers are now looking at textual analysis and approaches that get us away from those traditional ways of being or those traditional ways of thinking. One of my favorite authors, John L. Esposito, writes in an article entitled Women, Religion, and Empowerment, Daughters of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, they say that we have inherited a religious legacy that is not only a product of divine revelation, but also human interpretation. So while we do have divine revelation, particularly for those of us in Sharia law and in Torah law, who do believe that this is a divine way of God speaking, there's also the human interpretation of that. And Esposito says that the word of God mediated through the words of human beings, often overly male and overly patriarchal. And so these dehumanizing interpretive lenses further expose a disdain for the contrasexual. Now, that word is also being used to mean a lot of things in the world today. Here is how I'm using it. Defying the boundaries of traditional gender roles. Women participating in activities that are reserved for men, or that society tells us have been reserved for men. So the word contrasexual is a Jungian word, Carl Jung, and it speaks of this awareness of the internal nature of human beings. So there's a little bit of feminine in the man, and they call that emotional. And there's a little bit of masculine the feminine in the man, and they call that emotional, yes. And there's a little bit of masculine in the woman, and they call that rational. And so within that argument, I'm suggesting that even in that understanding, it's patriarchal. Jungian's thought evolves to not mean that this is rational and this is not, or that this person is emotional and this is not. He changes that to talk about empathy and reason, which I really, really like. And here is why. Because relationships are meant to be reciprocal. And while there is an aspect of intellect and emotion, the things that we really ascribe to, or the concepts that we really ascribe to that help us to be better in relationship is to empathize with one another and think reasonably about some of the things that go on within our relationships and within the world today that lead more to an ethical and equitable conclusion. So this reciprocity in relationships is often undermined by hegemonic interpretations. We're not able to get to the reciprocity in relationship because we have all of these biases that we're reading in. We have physical biases and intellectual biases, modern cultural distinctions that create these narratives about women. Khalid Abu El-Fadi examines this ideology Islamically in his book, Speaking in God's Name, Islamic Law, Authority, and Women. And he asserts the need for a conscious pause when stubborn institutions of male patriarchy that speak of women have played a dominant role in the male-dominated authorial enterprise. So I have some examples to kind of talk about this way of thinking with a little bit of male domination. And here is what I want to say before I use these, because I'm using these situations from I'm using hadith from my tradition. I'm using scripture from other traditions. And I want to say that this may not be how all of the scholars are interpreting these particular texts, but I want to kind of read them as they are and then talk a little bit about how sometimes others may interpret them. For instance, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu reportedly commented, "When the Prophet was alive, we were cautious in speaking and dealing with women, fearing that revelation would come from God concerning our behavior. When he died, we could not speak and deal with them." What does that really mean? What's the background of that particular text? Al-Fadi posits Ibn Umar's radiallahu anhu reflection are consistent with the widespread resistance to the presence of women in public forums. And so he cites another hadith or saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Hurairah reports that Hurairah, I'm nervous, reported that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed by a group of women. When he addressed them, the Prophet proclaimed, "O women, increase your prayers and then give more alms. For I have seen that women are majority of the inhabitants of hell." A wise woman asked, "Why are we the majority of the inhabitants of hell, O Prophet of God?" "Because you frequently slander and curse, and you are ungrateful companions. I have not seen anyone more deficient in intellect or religion, which can prevail over the wise than you." So the woman asked, "And what is our deficiency and intellect in religion?" The Prophet said, "Your deficiency is in intellect in that the fact that the testimony of the man is worth that of two women, and your deficiency in religion is that you spend days without fasting or praying. It's because of your menstrual cycle." So El-Fadi says, apologists argue that the deficiency of women is not demeaning. So this notion of deficiency, particularly with it being said by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's not demeaning. The meaning is legal, is according to legal capacity and not natural ability. What is significant is that there are a large number of determinations that exclude women because of words like this. Women are excluded from public life. They are imposing veils that are not written, that are not like the Qimar talks. The Quran talks about the Qimar, veils that are not written within sacred texts. The Council of the Scientific Research and Legal Opinions in Saudi Arabia frequently asserts that the majority of women, this is a quote, are the inhabitants of hell, and that they are of a limited emotional and intellectual capacity, not as sagacious as men, and therefore should not work outside the home, occupy positions of leadership, drive cars, pursue higher education, visit graves, travel without a male companion, or even attend a mosque other than one closest to home. And I'm not saying that everyone in the country or all legal jurists believe that, but this is something that is a common thought. So Judaism and Christianity shares narratives with Torah that often suffer at the hands of these masculine biases, particularly reasoning and rational thinking. For example, the Genesis 3:20, and the man called his wife Eve because she was the mother of all living things. Well, in Christianity, often that is ignored. It's seen, but Eve's character is contextualized from Genesis 3:13, the one whom Satan beguiles, and therefore is the harbinger of evils present in all the world. So this interpretation denies the possibility of Eve making a rational decision based on deductive reasoning of the information presented her. The fruit has the potential to make one wise. Like God, she discerns its benefit towards sustenance and insight. Wisdom is not forbidden. So, when Midrash, one interpretation says that the letter Samach does not appear in Genesis until the woman is created, which some interpret that when the woman was formed, Satan came with her. So the woman is then seen as man's evil urge and will cause him to sin. There's another journal article entitled Medieval Readings, Muslim, Jewish, and Christianity, 600 CE to 1500 CE. The author shares this, that Eve Ahwa in Arabic is never mentioned. There are no references to her as wife. Just the first woman helps us to understand the character and responsibilities expected by all women. She's never described as inferior. There's no reason attached for a connection to Adam. No helpmeet. She's not there to solve the problem for a man being lonely. She's also not the primary culprit for sin. So another approach in rereading some of these texts might consider that a woman's intellect might help interpret that God's intention was to prolong humanity's inevitable knowledge of the violence of evil, the good and evil, according to Torah and the biblical scriptures, the way that piece is read, it was already there. So then the serpent represents an imbalanced perspective. What does it mean to be godlike? And the serpent is the will of Satan to cause conflict in God's realm, as it says in Quran, for failure for Adam's for Satan or Shaitan's failure to bow to Adam, as in Islam. So either way, evil is already present. Wisdom fashioned for equitable and just treatment of all creation conceives the balance. The creation story reveals its duality, light and dark, sky and land, dry land and water from streams, oceans, moral and immoral, ethical and unethical, intellect and ignorance, good and evil. In Islam, Eve is unnamed initially, however, in 235, Baqarah 235, Eve is made and given a place alongside her husband Adam. O Adam, dwell you and your wife in paradise and eat in ease, abundance from wherever you will. However, do not approach the tree, lest you be among the wrongdoers. Scholars indicate that at this point, humanity turns away from wisdom, the all-knowing God, the source of all knowledge, and is left in the darkness of ignorance and error. Eve is not responsible for sin. She and Adam are responsible for life, as examples of one who are accountable for the things that depend upon a sense of agency in this world, whether good or evil. So as a result, these relationships remain strained and inculcated by racialized ideologies that question women in public spaces. And so quickly, as I move on so that we can have time for questions, I want us to think about how we wrestle with the dynamism of double consciousness. So women navigate the public sphere with the awareness that while impacting the home and the community, they are vilified by misogynistic tendencies and biases, shaped by rhetoric that narrates women as less than nullifying the endorsement of leadership roles, restraining women to wives and mothers, and sometimes women quelling the warrior within. Here's some examples. Trafficked and enslaved to North and South America. The plight of African American women provides the backdrop for unveiling the existential evil and oppressive views of women's roles. American counterparts developed skillful portrayals of Black women as wild harlots and mammy cooks who raise as Mrs. Children while fulfilling the master's lustful desires. Women bear the children of our own Black men, loved and breeding with those who are sold into chattel slavery as bucks. All the while, Black women were hated and exploited by white women and objectified, utilizing their privileged status. So Patricia Hill Collins writes of the four corresponding controlling images of Black womanhood reflecting the dominant group interested in maintaining Black women's subordination. And remember, I said earlier that my contention, what I assert here is that this develops this type of racialized way of looking at sexism. So while I am talking about my own experience and tradition, I'm also asserting that this notion of racialized systemic sexism is the experience of others as well. So listen to what Patricia O'Connell says. Conferred upon African American women is the image of the faithful mammy, obedient domestication, efforts to control require perpetuating symbols of racialization and are important, used to shape Black women's behavior. It also serves a symbolic function, a dumping ground for female functions that oppressive white society could not confront or contend with: intellectual, cultural, and surrogacy as the power of mothering children by birth and community. Mammy, the second image, symbolizes the good Black mother. The matriarch symbolizes the bad Black mother. Women who fail to fulfill womanly duties spend too much time away from home, cannot properly supervise their children, and are overly aggressive and unfeminine women who emasculate their lovers and husbands. So the third image is that of the welfare mom, associated with the breeders. Enslavers used fertility to control the enslaved political and economic equality. Labor and productivity units represent the political and economic stability. And Jezebel is a sexually aggressive whore. The projection of this stigma as a powerful rationale for sexual assaults of Black female and enslaved. Fertility was the expected outcome and economic basis for continuing racialized systems of economic exploitation and societal deprivation, slavery, and post-slavery. So racializing gender roles carries with it political and economic exploitation. These women are in society. We as women, those who are women here, we are in society, but not of society. That's the double consciousness. And it costs us a personhood, voice, and authority. Formerly in the church, scripture was used always to legitimize roles of inequity in leadership. I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. White men held power explicit in society. Black men held power, but it was power that was emasculated. Power in one sense, emasculated in another sense. This is historical. Preachers and lead field hands and reluctant to share the power because that was the only power that had. So these reciprocal relationships are devalued by both Black men and white men. Why? Because they had the power. In a hadith narrated by Abu Bakr and al-Bukhari, says when news reached the Prophet ﷺ that the Persians had made a Khosra their queen, he said, "Never will a people prosper who make a woman a ruler." This hadith has been used countless times to prevent women from becoming judges or leaders. There are 3 different rulings on this. For the sake of time, I will not go into all of them. That one applied to all kinds of leadership, one applies to only the caliphate. Some say that it's a fabrication of hadith so that it is considered inadmissible. Some say that it needs to be interpreted in light of the Persian culture, not necessarily Islamic culture or any other culture. Islam has similar renderings in the Quran that even revert how we think about that. In Nisa 32, do not covet what God has given to you more than others. Men have the portion they learn, women have the portion that they have earned, and should instead ask God for some of his bounties. God is full of knowledge of everything. Salama radiallahu anha, one of the Prophet's wives, claimed that the men received a greater reward for jihad and encouraged us to seek God for divine wisdom. So there are jurists that propose that this surah was to prove that women cannot lead in prayer. Women in Islam are permitted to teach. Men and women function as male scholars, jurists, educators, chaplains, wives, and mothers. In some cases, women have been allowed special privileges as imam. That's in the Sufi tradition. So far as I could research, contrasexuality asserts the presentation of these fundamental energies in the psyche, as well as present in the formidable power, mainly when engaged, not only from the ritualized mundane. Remember I said earlier, when I'm using these words, pastoral and ritual and religious, I'm not talking about from an institutionalized perspective. I'm talking about from the perspective of sacred. When I say religious necessity, and when I talk about the ritualized mundane from these things that we just do every day. I've not experienced discrimination like I felt previously. Because to the list of mammy, matriarch, welfare mom, and Jezebel, now we experience language like potential terrorist. We remember Muriel Degaki, who blew herself up in Iraq. Mia Bloom in the article Female Suicide Bombers, a global trend, states that the focus on female suicide bombers neglects the long history of male involvement in political violence, that they have historically played prominent roles in war and insurrection for a long time. So while I surely do not describe to any form of terrorism or any form of domestic violence or otherwise, here is what I will suggest. There are places and things that happen in our own lives, and we draw from those places because those places are sacred to us. And the things that we do as a result of that become what I call ritualized activities. Daily, women are faced with challenges of systemic oppression, defunding special need education, racialized religion, bullying, social stigma, unethical governmental agencies, food insecurity, mass incarceration, privatized prisons that impact our families and communities. Women desire to respond at the same time questioning, how does the advocacy for my family and my community and my friends affect my own life? And so it is at this point that we move from simply the woman or the wife or the mother into the warrior. Because now you're let me say it like this. Now you're in my backyard. And now you're affecting the things that are sacred to me. I want to give an example of two women. Aisha bint Abu Bakr, radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and mothers of the believers is who she's called, and Deborah, wife of Lapidus, is the mother of Israel, who calls herself the mother of Israel. I want to look at them as two examples of feminine double consciousness that cause women to transform and go from the ritualized mundane. Rosetta Ross coined that phrase, the ritualized mundane, to this religious necessity. Aisha radiallahu anha is described as the Prophet's beloved mother, but she is his wife. She's mother of the believers. She was also a jurist, a politician, and a warrior. She married young in the 5th year of Hijrah. She was accused of infidelity. She was slandered, but ultimately the jurist found her innocent. She was known for her transmissions or judicial rulings based on the Prophet's life. It was also well known that she was not domestic. In 636, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the concern was for the successor of the Prophet. Sunni Muslims believed that naturally his companions would succeed him. Abu Bakr, Ammar, Uthman were three of the successors. Shias contend that Ali ibn Abu Talib is the rightful successor through lineage, but was disregarded because of first faith. Uthman was assassinated. Ali assumed the throne. Upon hearing of Ali's assassination, Aisha returned. She was at Mecca. She returned, and upon counsel, she waged a war with 3,000 men, seeking vengeance for Uthman's blood. Some scholars claim that she had her own hatred. We don't know much about that. Others state that her political agenda was to place her nephew on the throne, in the place of the Prophet ﷺ. She was defeated, but she was defeated and turned her political agenda into juris hadith. So while she was defeated on one end, in Islam, she has known as having hadith and being a jurist and a preserver of the traditions like no other. She's well respected. Judges 4 and 5 of the Torah has a complementary woman, Deborah, referred to in the book of Judges as the judge. She's a prophetess. She's a military commander. Wins a battle assisted by another woman, Yael. From the narration, Deborah is the only woman reported as having the ability to judge the will of God. Many from Israel came to her to assist in judicial matters. Deborah calls Barak and questions whether God told him to go into battle with 10,000 men. I will draw Jabin's army with chariots and deliver him into your hands. Barak said, I will only go if you go with me. Deborah said, I'll go. God said, but you will not receive the honor in battle. And Sisera, the army commander, will fall by the hands of the woman. Israel was willing the battle. Sisera fled and sought rest in the tent of Yael, the Kenite. They were alleged allies. She gives him courage. He falls asleep. We know the story. She drives a tent peg into his head. Both Aisha and Deborah provide the context of political images that divide traditional female roles. They also depict the relationship role between duty, wife, and warrior. So, in order to bring this particular portion to a close, I'm going to say women in antiquity have played these roles, affecting change in the lives of families and communities, while a sense of duty for ages. And so, what the assertions that I've made, let me say it like this: this notion of authority is not about position. It affirms an authority from within that includes a rational thinking, a reasoning, not an emotional imbalance, but an empathy that addresses the family needs, the community needs, and preserves life with wisdom. As women increase in their current roles in religious leadership, i.e. education, chaplaincy, perhaps the confusion related to gender roles is the duty versus defiance, role versus reality. Warrior, politician, jurist, or religious leader is not defiance. It offers a grounding in traditional female culture where concrete experiences stimulate a distinct consciousness concerning a material reality. Here's the reality. There are times when a community needs that wife and a mother, but there are more times when the community needs a warrior.
Wow. Thank you. That was great. First thing I thought of especially when you were talking about the, is it double consciousness?
Yes.
Of all things, the speech that America Ferrera gives in Barbie, the Barbie movie, of like, as women, we have to be this and we have to be this. We have to think about this while we're also thinking about that. And it was just that hit really close to home. So I appreciate everything that you said. Does anybody else have any questions? I know Laura had asked earlier on about in Saudi Arabia, do you know why they might prevent women from visiting graves?
You know what? I want to say I do not have the answer to
That's
that.
okay.
Maybe there is someone on the line who can answer that as well.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, is it because the washing of the body, the family does, with the janazah, the family does that piece, but generally the closing of the grave, those are reserved for men. So I'm wondering if that's
right.
But I don't have the answer to that. I wish I did.
Okay, that's all right. Are there any other questions, comments?
I have a comment.
Sure, go ahead, Laura.
What I love about, and if you could give me the source, what I love about changing from the gender images of rational versus emotional to empathy versus reason is that empathy and reason are both relational terms.
Yes, that's called.
And so I think then the woman warrior, I mean, the way you're framing it up, the woman warrior goes to war out of a sense of relationship, not out of a sense of combat or a zero-sum game or one up, one down, but out of a sense of protecting and being part of a family and a community, and I love that.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that came across. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You made a comment talking about men before Prophet Muhammad died, that I got the sense that they didn't want women to prophesy because they didn't want to hear the quiet parts out loud. They didn't want to be told they were doing bad things, even though they were doing stuff they probably shouldn't have, and they didn't want to be called out on it. Was that a fair interpretation, or was my brain just going, that's off in the wrong direction?
I think some of that is a fair interpretation of not being one to call out. Some of it is just ego.
Yep.
Ego and entitlement.
Yeah, this calls to mind too for me a time when I was in college and went to a Christian Bible study of a tradition that I was not that I had not grown up in. And I only lasted one session because they went it was like it's a different worldview than I have, which is, I disagree with, but they were it was all about how, oh, your husband, he's just not going to know how to take care of himself. He's not going to know how to he's not going to be able to cook. He's just poor thing. But he's also the head of the household. You need to listen to what he says. And I was just like, the cognitive dissonance there. Like, it's one thing if you tell me that he is smarter than me and better than me, and then therefore I need to listen to him. But no, it was that he's a poor, frail, fragile thing. But I also need, So I didn't last long in that Bible study.
I'm sure. Yeah, that's very interesting, the way in which we conceptualize these roles and these duties as male and female, and the detail that we put into them, and kind of like I was talking about, how sacred these things become to us. They become the very pieces that we hang our existence on, how we function in every aspect of life. They become so sacred that they're unquestionable, and that's dangerous.
Yeah, another book that I can recommend that I read recently is called The Making of Biblical Womanhood. And it's from written by a woman who grew up in an evangelical Christian tradition. I can't remember her name. I can look that up. But she goes through and kind of breaks down some of the history. She's by occupation, I believe, is a medieval historian. And so she goes back and looks at some biblical passages and like what's the context for them? What was usually Paul, actually saying about the role of women? Because some of the things that she points out of like, this is actually a more rhetorical thing that he's saying, that you can read it where he's like, you say women should not speak, blah, blah, blah. It's actually him being like, oh, really? That's what you think? So it's like really turning things on its head. And it was just really fascinating just to get that other kind of biblical critique that we don't hear as often. So yes, Beth Allison Barr, that's correct.
Okay, I'm actually going to get that book. I haven't read that one, but I'm writing it down now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great to get that perspective still, because I've read that type of comment in relations to one of the New Testament passages that talk about women veiling, when I was doing some writing on women and veiling, and where Paul talks about that. And so I read that some people think he's saying, oh yeah, women should veil. Then at the end of it, he says, well, it's your choice. That's not really what we do on our Judeo-Christian response, and yet veiling is important. So that same kind of, did I get what I'm saying? Hold on, what I'm trying to say. You're making it what to be.
And then Bonnie asked, any ideas of how we break this cycle for the next generation?
I think
big question.
I think we keep talking and we keep interpreting. If we can't come and have a gathering like this where we speak and we talk and we're able to really look critically at this text, I wish more religious institutions, particularly the Abrahamic faiths, would look deeply critical at text, how they're being used, the context in which they've come, the whole hermeneutical structure, how we look at text. I think that that's really important, especially in our religious institutions that have a fair amount of young adults and youth. Sometimes I think we get so hyped up I know in our tradition, we get so excited about having them that we want to do the next great thing, the next greatest thing to keep them in there. And I think that's important. But I think also essential to that is have them sit with the text. Have them sit with it. Have them ask questions. I teach vocation. I teach young adults, and when I'm teaching any of the sacred scriptures, I have to sit with it. I said, "Tell me what that means. Make that." I said, "Make that make sense. What does that mean?" And one of the things that we think is all
Okay, can I interrupt you? We're having some problems with the sound, your audio.
a little
Do
bit.
you have noise canceling on?
No, I don't.
Okay, that might help because we're getting a lot of background sounds starting to filter in.
That's probably because someone moved into this space.
Yeah, the noise canceling might cut them out at least and focus on your voice because right now it's bouncing between you and them, not knowing which to center on.
I don't know how to put on noise canceling.
Little up arrow next to the microphone symbol, audio settings. And in there, you should be able to get to noise it'll pull up and give you an option to do noise canceling audio profile at the bottom.
I see output volume, plus microphone, echo canceling. Is that better?
Talk some more.
Remove the noise. So
Yeah, a little better.
okay, good. So the question I was answering is about the young adults. I teach them, and I ask them to sit with the text and make it make sense, and then look at our context today. And then looking at our context today, how would this work within our context? What does it say to you? Do we see anything that we consider biases? What are your own personal biases? What are the personal biases that you were taught within your family? Can we course correct? Can we begin to think about these things in different ways so they apply to our lives and that we can create a different future? If we don't actually get them to learn the text and what it says, but also critically think about it, then we'll continue to repeat the same cycle. And that's my belief.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions?
I want to thank you all for the opportunity while you're thinking. This has really been a great opportunity. Thank you for listening to my ramblings and thoughts.
Oh, thank you. We had just looking at the comments, some really good things to say. Carrie said this, I expect this to be the best thing I come into contact with this week. So high praise. A lot of good feedback. And I just thank you for all of your support of Tri-Faith. It seems like anytime we have something to sign up for, you're one of the first people to sign up. So we look forward. Safiyyah's going to be with us, have a table for her organization at our Race, Religion, and Social Justice Conference. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. We have a few minutes.
Okay, I have a non-for-profit called the SEED program. The SEED program stands for Social Equity, Ethics, and Diversity. And the work that we do in the SEED program is much of what I've talked about. We try to get Abrahamic faith and other traditions to come together under the auspices of Tawhid. So our premise is one God, but we try to come together and do activities together that work towards the flourishing of community. So, and sometimes we are mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers but we all consider ourselves warriors, advocates for a better community and a better world. And so that's our mantra and the work that we do. And if you're there, I'd love for you to stop by the table, let me know that you saw this presentation, and let us love on you and get to know you.
I'm going to share a link to that for chat for anybody that wants to see it. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. This was so well attended and good questions. Safiyyah, thank you so much. I just appreciate you and I look forward to seeing you later this spring and summer. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you all next month. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.